Okay, thanks.
All right, everyone. Have a great session.
Okay, hopefully you can see my screen.
Yep.
Okay, good. I'm Kathy Kellenberger. I am a senior consultant with Pragmatic Works, and today I want to talk about what's new in SSIS 2012. So if you were one of the folks who was heavily invested in DTS back in the day and had to migrate packages to SSIS, you had a pretty steep learning curve, and it was a lot of work to migrate all those packages. The lucky thing for you is if you are now on SSIS and just need to go to SSIS 2012, even though there has been quite a few changes, we don't have that steep learning curve, so you are in luck. All the knowledge and skills that you have presently with, let's see, let's choose that one. Hopefully that's right. The knowledge that you have with your existing SSIS implementation is going to serve you well moving forward. There are some things to learn, but it's not as painful as that DTS to SSIS migration that you may have gone through a few years ago or even recently. The changes, of which there are many, I've divided into several sections. There are some cosmetic changes that really don't affect the way you work at all. They're just kind of eye candy. There are some changes that will make working with SSIS more convenient. They've corrected some little annoyances that may have slowed you down in previous versions of SSIS. There are some changes with development, not really a whole lot, which is kind of surprising, but there are a few, and there may be some I just haven't discovered yet, because what I found was the documentation, the official Books Online documentation on what's new with SSIS really didn't cover everything that's out there. There are some changes with troubleshooting and logging, and makes logging a whole lot easier. And probably the biggest change is around deployment. So we'll see if we can cover all of these, and what I would like to do is this session will probably take close to an hour. If we have time for questions at the end, I'll try to address those questions, but what I will do for sure is I'll write a blog with the answers to any questions that you may have. We'll just have Rachel send them to me after the session's done. So that's the end of the slides. Let's just jump right in and take a look at what's new. The first thing that is a cosmetic change is that we no longer have bids. Now we have SQL Server data tools. It really doesn't make a difference to how you work day to day. The thing that is kind of annoying to me is that, you know, I love that acronym BIDS. I can say BIDS. Everybody knows what I'm talking about. Now we've got SQL Server Data Tools. We'll call it SSDT, but it just doesn't roll off the tongue as nicely as BIDS. So that, to me, is a little disappointing, but, you know, it doesn't make a difference in how you work from day to day. All right. Otherwise, you know, we're still in that Visual Studio environment, and you can run this in either Visual Studio 2010 or Visual Studio 2012. So they have made a change where you can, going forward, you're not stuck in a particular version of Visual Studio, which will make your life a little bit easier. One of the first things you'll notice is this Getting Started window. And you can make it go away. You can dismiss it and never look at it. But it does have some useful links to some tutorials and videos to help you get started with SSIS. So that's kind of nice, especially if you're new to SSIS. If you're just new to 2012 and you have a lot of experience in previous versions, you may not care about that. But if you're new to SSIS, on any version, this is a really nice little feature. Okay, so take a look at this control flow, and you may notice that the controls or the tasks I have here do look different. Notice these rounded corners and the little shadow behind them. Whenever the new features of SSIS 2012 were announced at the PASS conference, and I don't remember if this was 2011 or 2010, probably 2011, when they announced that, it was kind of a big joke that the biggest enhancement was these rounded corners. Obviously it was just a joke. So, it doesn't make any difference to how you do your work. It just looks different. I'm going to run this package, and when I do, you'll see another cosmetic change. In the past, the task would change color from they would change color from white to yellow and to green or red as the package ran. You'll notice instead of that, now we have these little twirly icons over on the corner. If I take a look at a data flow, there's another cosmetic change here. Hopefully you're not, I think red-green is the most common color blind, but for some reason in the data flow, instead of having a green arrow, they have a blue arrow. Not sure why that's different, but it is what it is. Another cosmetic type change, and one that confused me quite a bit at first, was that if for some reason I dismiss my toolbox, usually the way I would always get it back would be to view toolbox. Unfortunately, this is not the right toolbox. Not sure why they did it, but now they have a toolbox that's specifically for SSIS. And to get it back, I can right-click in the control, oops, not that area, yeah, I can, data flow control flow area and get the SSIS toolbox back. Or I could also click on this little icon over here. You'll notice that the toolbox is divided into several sections now. We have some favorites, we have common, other transforms, other sources, other destinations, and if I go over to the control flow, you'll see that we also have some new sections. I'm not real thrilled about this piece yet because I feel like I'm spending more time trying to find the task or transform than I need, but maybe I'll get used to it. One thing I can do is I can right-click on a particular task or transform or source or destination, and I can move it to a different group. Again, it's probably not going to affect the way you work, but it's just something you need to be aware of. So that's it for the cosmetic type changes. So, again, to me, I'm working for a customer right now, and I have been really all year doing SSIS work on 2008 R2. So it makes my brain have to kind of flip a switch as I go back between working with 2012 and working with 2008 R2. I'm used to it now, but at first it just kind of threw me a little bit every time I would open up SSIS 2012 and things look different. I think I'm pretty used to it, so not much of a problem anymore. And I see if I can move this little GoToMeeting thing out of the way. All right, the next thing we're going to take a look at is convenience. Little things that can make your life easier. One thing, oh, and I don't, okay, let me close this package again, and I'm going to go over to Management Studio, and I'm going to take this one database offline. So usually when you are working with SSIS in previous versions, if you have a server or that's offline or you can't connect to, usually you're going to have some problems just opening the package. But this is a nice little convenience. Notice that even though my database is offline, I was able to open the package very quickly. It didn't spend a lot of time trying to connect, and I have this nice little icon that shows me that it's offline. Once I realize there's a problem, I can go over and fix the problem, come back to my package and test the connectivity, and it's fixed. Maybe I know that I've dealt with this issue in 2008 R2 recently, and I don't know if offhand if there is a test connectivity, but what I ended up doing was just closing the package back up and opening it again to fix the issues. So I know this is nice. I believe this is a new way to do it. Another convenient feature that has to do with connection managers is the fact that we can create, we've always been able to create connection managers at the package level and then point to them at the, we've always been able to create connection managers at the project level and then point to them at the package level. But this is a cool feature. I can create a new connection manager at the project level. Hopefully I keep saying it the right way. Let's just go with that one right there. And when I do, I automatically inherit that connection manager in my project. So that's a nice feature that'll save me a few seconds. Okay, not a lot of nothing to change the world here, but a nice little feature. The other thing is that, and I haven't even tried this, but I've heard, well, maybe I shouldn't even say it. I've heard that you can also use configurations against this project level connection manager. I haven't tried that though, so that's something I need to look into. I can go ahead in my blog that I write about questions, go ahead and include that information and how that works. All right, one of the most annoying things about previous versions of SSIS was the lack of an undo redo. So if I accidentally deleted a task or whatever, I've got in the past I've had two choices. I can either very carefully close the package up without saving it and open it back up and hopefully the bad thing I just did goes away, or I can just go ahead and redevelop the whole thing. Not the whole package, but whatever I deleted. Just go in and manually fix everything. We now have a redo and undo. That's going to save us some time. That's just one of those annoyances that they've managed to fix. Another one, and this one drives me nuts, is the copy paste. So previous versions, if I pasted that task into the control flow, it would paste in, but it would generally paste somewhere that I couldn't even see it, and then I'd have to move the control flow around searching for the control I pasted in. Now it pastes right where your mouse, your cursor is clicking. So much nicer. I have no idea why the old one worked that way. It was like there was a random property about it or something. Okay, what's next? Another convenience. This one is really huge, and I've had felt a lot of pain doing. Like I said, I've been doing SSIS development all year. I have felt a lot of pain with this particular issue. So let's say I have a data flow set up, and I need to come in here and add another column. So if you've got a lot of experience with SSIS, you know what usually happens. This lower transform and data sources get marked with a red X, and usually I'll have to click, like in this case I'd have to click on the union all, and I'd get a message about it can't figure out what all the columns are, and do I want to remove, do I want to set them by name, do I want to remove them? It is just a nightmare. So if you notice, that didn't happen in this case, and I can just come in here and just go ahead and take care of the issue, and it just all works. Even if I do something like this, let's get rid of that. I have a problem here, but look what I can do. I can right-click and go to Resolve References, and I can fix things. So in this case, I just deleted it, but there's also this Resolve References that I can come in and make things right as well. So even though that's a convenient type of feature, it's really huge. It's going to save people a lot of time not to have these things blowing up all of the time. Another really nice feature that just is going to save you some clicks is the data viewer. So in previous versions, the data viewer would take about, I don't know, 5 or 6 clicks. Now we can just right-click, enable data viewer, right-click, disable data viewer. And data viewer is one of my favorite parts about SSIS, being able to take a look and troubleshoot what's going on. Another annoyance that we've had is the inability to see at a glance that a connection manager or a variable is defined with an expression. So I look at this flat file connection manager here, and I go over to properties. I can set up an expression, for example, the connection string. I'm just going to put in the same value. Now what happens is that I have this little icon that tells me that there is an expression defining that flat file connection manager. So again, this is convenient. It's going to save you time instead of having to dig and trying to figure out what's going on. Let's take a look at variables as well. So the variable window works pretty much the same. We define a variable, we give it a data type. In the past, if I accidentally created a variable, not even getting it to work, but at the wrong scope. So say, for example, I accidentally had one of the tasks selected. That's probably because I need to go here. Let's go here. If I had a task selected and I didn't create my variable with the correct scope, I was kind of stuck. A lot of times I would not be able to find my variable, which was really annoying. So in 2012, we actually have this little move variable icon that allows us to take the particular variable and move it to a different location. So now I can't see it, but remember how in previous versions, if you have a variable assigned, or the scope of the variable of a particular task, you can't see it unless you click on that task. There's also an option which I think is pretty nice, show variables of all options. You can see all the variables at the same time. So I think that is actually pretty nice. Again, this is just one of those little annoyances that we've had to deal with, but it's not, earth-shattering. We've dealt with it. We've lived with it. This just is going to make our lives easier. One other thing about, I'm going to say, is a convenience feature is the XML format. They have really cleaned up the XML format, making it much easier to look at. And if you use a tool to compare, if you want to use a tool to compare two different packages to find the differences, for example, maybe I think maybe a tool like WinDiff possibly, you can now use that because this XML format is so much cleaner, so much easier to work with. So that's it for the convenience features. Let's take a look at development. I'm going to move this getting started window. So in development, it doesn't seem to me like there's a ton of changes. One that I really, really like is this new expression tasks. So imagine if you have a variable and you can set a value, a default value for the variable. You can also make the variable depend on an expression. You can do that as well. But what if you need to change the value of the variable, for example, like a dynamic SQL type statement, a dynamic command that depends on values earlier in the process. In the past, if you want this variable to change depending on a certain point in the process, you would have to add a script task to do it. And that's not a bad thing, but here's this new expression task that now allows me to assign a value to a variable. So I really love this. It's just so much simpler. Maybe I should have put that under convenience because it's not something you couldn't do before, but it really is a development feature. Another thing they've changed is the flat file connection manager. They haven't done anything bad with it, but if I take a look at a file like this, so there's 4 columns in this file, but notice that some of my data is incomplete. Previous versions of SSIS, you really would have problems processing this file. You might have to go jump through some hoops, some workarounds. The cool thing is that now this flat file connection manager, there we go, doesn't mind those missing columns, and it just goes ahead and let's show that this is the correct file that I'm looking at. It goes ahead and just accepts blanks for those missing values, even though we didn't have the delimiter, the comma, in all the places. So that's really, really nice. It's going to save you some time with these files that don't always come to you clean. Let's take a look at pivot. So pivot is a control used to pivot data. For example, let's say you have all your data, you want to pivot it by month. You want to have headings of January, February, March, etc. The original pivot control, which I have only started using a couple of months ago, to me is really, really confusing, really difficult to figure out. So the new pivot control or task looks like this. So I can set an order month and set a pivot key, set an identifier key for the row, pivot value, and then it actually generates these for me. Let me go ahead and execute this and we can see how it works. So there's my data to start with, and this is what it gives me. So the names of the columns are kind of weird, but it definitely is usable. I mean, this is not for report. This is, to dump somewhere else. So wherever you're going to dump this data, you can, do the mapping and everything will be great. So that's pretty nice. There are some other new controls. One is for change data capture. So change data capture was introduced, I believe, in 2008. It's an Enterprise Edition feature, and it's really great, but it is a little tricky to work with in your SSIS package. So they have added, let me go to the control flow here, they have added a control task for CDC to control like where the package started and stopped on processing the changes. And let me add a data flow here. There's also a CDC Source. So the CDC Source will automatically read the CDC special table, or tables, I should say. And there's also a CDC splitter, so that the rows that need to be processed can go down one route and the rows that don't need to be processed can go down the other. So it makes working with CDC a lot easier. There are also some new, there's also another CDC set of controls for working with Oracle. Those do not get installed by default. You have to go back to the media and install those, but those are from the company Attunity. So if you are working with Oracle data and you want to do change data capture against Oracle, this can save you a lot of money over purchasing those Attunity controls, which you can actually purchase directly from them, or you can also get them in Enterprise Edition of SSIS 2012. I don't believe the controls that come with SSIS are identical to the Attunity controls if you purchase them, but they are based on the same technology. So that is it for development, and there may be other things. Like if I go out to the website, the MSDN article, What's New in SSIS 2012, they don't even mention the pivot change. So, there's probably some other ones out there, and as I continue to work with SSIS 2012, I'm sure I'll stumble on some more. The next area is deployment, and deployment is the biggest area, the biggest change you're going to have to deal with. I really love what they've done with deployment. It's just so much easier. Deployment in previous versions, there's just too many options, and it's just a lot of work to figure out what you're going to do. Once you have a framework in place, you're good to go. But you know, this is really clean, really nice. So let's go look at Management Studio first. So in previous versions, we could connect to this integration services service. This is left into 2012 for backwards compatibility. You really don't need that in SSIS 2012. Unless you choose to use the old deployment model. You still have a choice. You can use the old deployment model or the new model. You use the old model, you still may want to connect that way, depending on how you've deployed your packages. And again, the old deployment model has way too many choices, so you may not even need that. You'll notice in Management Studio that we now have a new folder called Integration Services Catalogs. So to get started, what I need to do is right-click and create a catalog. I need to give it a password. The reason for this is that some of the data in this Integration Services catalog is going to be encrypted. So this sets up all the encryption for you. Makes it really nice. I'm going to click OK and wait. And once this is done, I'll have a new database that's specific for SSIS. Let me refresh this here. And now I see I've got this new database that and this is where the SSIS packages will actually live. All the configuration, all of the logging, everything will go in this new database. And it's all going to be automatically set up for you. You won't really have to come up with your own framework. Basically this is like a framework already set up for you. Okay, so we've got this. When I created that catalog, I ended up with this little item here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to create a folder. Let's call it SSIS 2012 session. And these folders give you a way to organize your SSIS deployment. So underneath that, I don't have any projects left, but I've got projects and environments. And environments is where you're going to set up all of those things like username, passwords, server names, any other variable type information that depends on you know, where you want your package to point. So if you have, you know, a dev environment, a QA environment, a production environment, user acceptance testing, you know, whatever you have, you can set up these different environments. Once we do set up the environment, then we can go to properties and we can set up some variables. So I'm just going to set up int value and make it an integer and call it 1000. I can also set a sensitive property here, and if I do, that means that that value will be encrypted inside the database, so no one will actually be able to see it. The package will, but no visible eyes will. Let's add a string value as well, and we're going to say this is from QA. We can also set up permissions. Who is allowed to look at these permissions or modify them? Maybe you'll have a team that's allowed to read them for troubleshooting but are not allowed to modify them. And it can be different depending on which environment. Maybe you can have it read-only for production and modify, the same person modify for dev. So it's really up to your company what you want to do. So really this takes the place of configuration files or configuration tables. You just set it up here. It's so easy. Let's go ahead and see how we actually deploy. So there's a new model called the project model deployment as opposed to the package model deployment. So if I right-click on my project, you'll see that I can, if I want to, convert back to that package deployment model. So I can go back and forth. This would be fine for migrating your existing packages to make sure that you have time to understand this new model and get it set up. So that's really what it's for. Or if you just decided that you don't like the new model and you just want to stay with the old, you've got a really great framework set up, that's fine too. You've got a choice. So in order to deploy my packages, all I have to do is right-click and say deploy and follow this wizard. And it only asks me two questions. Where is the server that I would like to deploy to, and what is the folder in that server? So I could create a new folder here, whatever I want to do. Okay, so that is it. I just wait a few seconds, and when this is done, I'll see my packages in Management Studio. So I'm going to refresh this. There's my project, and there's my packages. So those are all the packages that I had in that project. Before I show you how to run them, I'm going to show you another feature, and that's parameters. Parameters are brand new with 2012, and basically they don't take the place of variables, but they kind of divide up the work that variables used to do. So for example, in older versions of SSIS, you could have a master package and child packages, and you could have variables passed in from the master package to the child package. So this is going to take the place of something like that. You probably can still do that. I haven't tried it, but basically when you are running a package that's been deployed, we're going to map values to these project parameters or package parameters instead of exposing variables. Variables are going to now really be inside the package, not really exposed to the outside. So we can create two types of parameters. We can create parameters at the project level. So this means that anything I correct at the project level will be seen at all the packages. It's kind of like the same thing that you get with configuration managers. I can also, at any package, create parameters as well. The caveat here is that once I create parameters, I cannot go back to that old package deployment model. This is the line in the sand where I can no longer go back and forth because these parameters are not really supported in older versions. So let's take a look at my package here. Let me come up here. I have a a database, and this is not logging. I just want to show you how these parameters work. So I have a little table that's going to select the date, a integer value, a string value, and a source. Where did that value come from, or those values come from? I have in my control flow execute SQL statement that runs an insert statement into that table with a variable. So by default, this variable inserts a row into that log with the values of 1, default, and default value. But I'm using these expression tasks to change the value of my variable as the package runs, to use the package parameters as well as telling us that's where it came from, package parameter. And then I just run that same, run the command from the variable again, and then I change it to project parameters. So this is going to run the same insert statement 3 times, but each time we are grabbing a value from the parameter to modify our SQL statement. So that ran. I'm going to come back to my table, and you can see that it worked. The first execute SQL inserted the default values, the second one inserted the package parameters, and the third inserted the project parameters. Okay, fantastic. So we've got this project deployed. I'm going to do that. We've got this project deployed. So how do I hook up my QA environment, the values that I have set there, to my packages? So let's see what we can do. There's a configure, and I can also configure things at the package level or the project level. So let me go ahead and do that. So at the project level, I can see all parameters, and I can see the default value if there is one. Probably going to be one. I can also, even though I haven't set up parameters for the connection managers, I see all the connection managers here as well, and I can modify them at this point. Very, very convenient. So if I take a look at this, I can, let's go ahead and look at that. I can edit the value, use the default value that comes from the package, or use an environment variable. So that's not available right now. So I wonder why. If I look at references, here's where I set up references pointing to those environments. Now when I do that, I can choose to use whatever, in this case it's an integer, so I've got a list of whatever integers are in that environment. Okay? I'll click OK. Let me change this one as well. There's my string. So I've got those set up. Now to run a package, what I can do, and this kind of annoys me a bit, but if I right-click and choose Execute, I get these little warnings here, actually errors, that tell me that there's no environment has been set up. So for some reason, whenever you run this manually, you still have to go in and I always forget to do this. Got to choose my environment down at the bottom. Choose the environment, and then when I do that, I can. Why am I not seeing? Oh, it automatically set it for me. There was only one integer and one string. So whenever I checked which environment I wanted, it automatically set that up for me. So now I can say OK, and the package is going to run. I'm going to dismiss this window for right now. It asks me if I want to look at a report. We'll look at that in the next section. So let me go ahead and run this and see what happened. Now we've got another set of results. This time I have a value that says this is from QA. So this time when I ran the package, it actually pulled the values from my QA environment. It was so easy to set up. Okay, so you say, I'm not going to be running my packages manually. I want to set up a job. So how do we do that? Let's go to New Job, and I'm going to make this owned by SA and add a new step. I'm going to choose the type, make it integration services. I can choose the old methods like the package store, whatever, but if I choose SSIS catalog, then I need to tell it what the server name is, and then I navigate to my package. Come on. Oh, I see what I did. Made a mistake there. Should have typed in localhost. Okay, let's try that again. There we go. So we can grab our package, and then on this configuration, I've got the parameters. It looks just like I worked with on the other screen. I can choose the environment. In this case, let me do this. Let's say have another value. Let's call it 500, and let's do this. Let's call that from job. Probably wouldn't do that. You would probably set it up against an environment. I could change the package parameters as well if I wanted to, and I probably would want to. I can modify the connection managers and change any property path as well. I'll click OK. I'm going to go ahead and run this job. Hopefully it runs okay. And once it's done, we'll take a look at these values that I'm logging here. Oh, this guy's in my way again. And you can see that now we've got a value inserted from the job. Okay. So it's really easy. It takes a little bit to get used to, but it's really, really nice. Another thing that I might want to do is create a script for my job. So let me right-click, or script is not for the job, but just a run. And there's several new commands. Let's go to execute. Again, it's going to ask me, I'm just going to check environment down here. And instead of running it, I'm going to click script and then cancel it. So there are some brand new T-SQL functions that are part of this SSIS DB database. And the interesting thing to me is that I would expect the values that there's parameters here. I would expect something for the parameters at this point, but I only see one parameter, which is logging level, and we'll learn about that in the next section. If I run this, I'm wondering, well, which set of parameters is this going to use? So I'll go ahead and run it. One of the interesting things is there's an execution ID. That is the way that this particular run is identified in our database. Let me go back here and take a look at what it did, and it's got the properties that were configured at that project level. That's what it's using. So when I run it like this, however it's set up over here in the project, that's the settings that it's going to have when it runs from a script. So that's really important to keep in mind. let's see, there's one other interesting thing about deployment I would like to show you. In my bin directory of my project, there is a new kind of file called an AXSpec file. So what that is, it's kind of like a zip file. Inside that file, it has everything that you need to deploy this project. So what you can do is you can just email this file to the person that's supposed to deploy the packages. Whenever they run it, double-click it, that same wizard that you saw when I deployed the project pops up, and they just have to answer those same two questions. Which server and where in the catalog does the project go? So in fact, if I would change that extension to zip, I can double-click it and I can see all my packages inside there and everything I need. So this is just with that new deployment model. So that's it on deployment, and I think I could have a whole session just on deployment to even dig deeper. But we still have one section to cover, which is the troubleshooting and logging. So logging, again, it's one of those things that can really be a pain in your side because, what do you log? You got to remember to set it up. You may have just abandoned the built-in logging and either use a third-party product or develop your own logging, just because the logging that was built in was just kind of cumbersome and not that useful. So to get over that issue, we have new logging that you get by default, which is pretty interesting. By default, we get logging inside that SSIS DB database, and you can create your own reports, queries, whatever you want to do against that database. But also, just to get you started, if I right-click and go to Reports, Standard Reports, All Executions, I have a couple of built-in reports just for just for this. This is only available if you decide to use the new project deployment level. So I can see that, what failed, any mess, I can drill down and look at performance. So this is pretty nice. So out of the box, you get some nice reports. If I run a package, let's see, let me execute, choose my environment, and say OK. This is that message that I just dismissed earlier. Would I like to open report view now? Open the report now. So that just opens it up for me right now. So that's what that was earlier that I just kind of passed over. If I take a look at the SSIS DB database, I can see there's a lot of tables, but there's also quite a few views. This is really get you started looking at this information, creating your own reports. You could probably set up some kind of a job that maybe alerted you based on values in these tables, whatever you want to do. They've made it very easy to get started and also very flexible for you. So there are some different levels of logging, and I've left it at the default, but what I can do is I can set the level of logging at the server level, I can set it at the project level, I can set it at the package level, and I can also set it at the execution level as well. So in this case, I could have modified the logging level, so there, I believe it's like 1 through 4, the different levels. So you've got a lot of flexibility, and it's super easy to set up. You don't have to try to figure out what to do. Another, I'm almost out of time, but I want to show you another interesting thing, which is data taps. If I am in a data flow, I can use a viewer, a data viewer, to look at the data. If the package is deployed, I can't really do that. There is a new feature called data taps, and I don't think well, let me go ahead and try to see if I can demonstrate it really quickly. So what we can do with the data tab is we can actually not have a data viewer there, but we can set up a property in the execution script to export the data that we would have seen in a data tab. So let me see if I can, I'll zoom in on this. Write this down if you're interested in learning how to set it up. I do have this blog and also another blog post about child packages, or just go to BIDN and do a search for data tab. There's also a couple of other blogs out there. So what I would do is I would right-click, execute. I'm going to choose the environment. I'm going to script it out. So there's my script by default. I'm going to grab this data tap SQL. This is the command I've got to add. I don't really have time to go into how I figured it out, but you can take a look at my blog to learn more. Hopefully everything is right, and I'm going to run it. Now, when I go to this data dump folder, maybe it didn't work. Oh, I've got the wrong package. I need to do troubleshooting. Let me try that again. Okay, now there it is. Okay, so now I have a file that has what I would have seen in a data viewer, except it's output to a folder. This is not something that you would want to do on an ongoing basis, but it would be great for troubleshooting. So that is probably as much as I can cover. Let me show you I don't hear Rachel coming back on.
Hey, Kathy,
I'll show
I'm
you
right
one
here.
other cool thing. If I go to, I can validate. Ah! You scared me. Sorry.
Sorry, it's okay.
Okay, so you can validate. You can validate your packages to make sure that all the connections are configured right, and you can also revert back to an earlier version. So if I had additional versions here, I could actually revert back. Okay, I am done.
Okay, that was a great presentation, Kathy. Thank you
you.
very much. And we do have quite a few questions, but as you mentioned, we are out of time, so I'll just pull those and send those directly to you to follow up in a blog post.
Yes.
And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thank you, Kathy.
Okay. Thank you very much. Go out to BIDN.com and search for my name, and you should see all the answers to the questions in a couple of days. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.